Arc 6, The Corridor of Memories. Chapter 79, Ready Steady Go. The giant scorpion was the one who fired off the first blow to start the battle. Its red compound eyes glittered brightly, and immediately afterwards, a white ray of light gushed forth from its swinging tail. What was terrifying about that was that its blow, meant as a fatal one for them, had been fired off without even one of its typical cries. With nary even a hiss, the giant scorpion nonchalantly rained death down towards them. Subaru had tons of bad memories associated with that white light. Specifically, he'd been killed by it in around half of his 15+ attempts inside the tower. Nevertheless, given that he'd been killed so much by it, he did learn a thing or two, despite how much he despised it. Namely, Subaru, the time it takes to charge up and the signs it shows when it's about to attack. The scorpion's compound eyes and stinger both glowed a smidgen more when it was about to unleash an attack. These signs were so subtle, to the point he thought he was just seeing things, but this eye for survival was what Subaru had developed through his mortal trial and errors. Making full use of it, Subaru ran with Beatrice in his arms, taking it upon himself to close the gap between them and the giant scorpion. Reason being, Subaru, its charging speed is pretty damn slow. With a twist of his body, he dodged the white ray light that had welled forth as he said that. Even if he called the ray of light slow, it was still much faster than a pitch from a shoddy high school baseball player. Fortunately though, he was confident in his ability to tell whether a pitch was good or not. And in any case, there was no way he was going to stay alive without being able to do that. A great man had once said that life was all about trial and error. Though, he probably hadn't been envisioning these life or death situations when he'd said that. Even so, you learn by making mistakes. That was an immutable truth. Subaru luckily had the ability to go through trial and error in life or death situations. He'd made full use of that to find his eye for survival. Thus this was Natsuki Subaru's arena. Subaru, I'm sorry for not being able to live up to all your expectations, other me. Subaru dished out a heartfelt apology to his other self who'd sought out an almighty Natsuki Subaru. It was like he was saying to them, I'm sorry for only being able to fight dirty. Beatrice though reacted with a snorted humph. She was still held tightly in between his arms, dancing this jig of life and death with him. Beatrice, what are you talking about, in fact? You've never failed to live up to our expectations, I suppose. Beatrice spoke up, then raised her hand up in a flash. From her thin lips, she chanted the word Morak, a kind of magic that tampered with the law of gravity. The giant scorpion had once been hit with its effects and pushed far away below them. So this time, the scorpion braced its jet black shell and planted its legs firmly so that it wouldn't go through the same thing again. However, Melee, you're just playing into my hands if you're going to stay still. A barrage of witch beasts began to assail the unmoving giant scorpion. The strange-looking witch beasts Melee had ordered the attack from were called Hanamagura. They looked like what you'd get if you crossed wings and horns together. And just like bullets that held no fear of death, they shot towards the giant scorpion and unhesitatingly struck its tough shell with their horns. The sounds of them crashing against it overlapped with the sounds of shattering. The giant scorpion writhed in pain and raised its large pincers in retaliation. Ka. What followed the attack in their stead was the bizarrest of all bizarre-looking figures. A being that was the very manifestation of a nightmare-ridden knight, the centaur that was a cross between man and horse, the hungry horse king. The terrible wail of babies swept through the watchtower's balcony. Along with it came a grating roar that made him want to cover his ears up, and then a burst of flames which violently filled the area around them, almost all the way up to the sky. Hungry Horse King, ka. The Hungry Horse King didn't hesitate and thrust its fiery spear right into the heart of the flames. Its red-hot tip was going to land a critical hit that would burn through even the scorpion's iron-like shell. The giant scorpion was overwhelmingly strong when it came to plain fighting strength. However, that didn't mean attacks wouldn't work against it. It felt pain if struck, just like any living creature. It felt pain if struck. If struck. Subaru. Thus the giant scorpion embodied the then everything's hunky-dory so long as I'm not hit sort of mantra. It caught the fiery spear with one of its enormous pincers and severed the Hungry Horse King's arm in one swoop. The Horse King tried to regenerate its wound, but it had been ruthlessly cauterized by its own fiery spear. The squirming, bubbling flesh of its wound trying to regenerate itself stopped in its tracks. Subaru had been able to obtain an unnecessary tidbit from this, namely, that it wouldn't be able to regenerate its burnt wounds. The Hungry Horse King was now stopped in its tracks, but then, the giant scorpion's stinger went off with a bang into the Hungry Horse King's body, causing its large body to burst open from within. The Hungry Horse King's flesh and blood scattered everywhere, and along with it went its life. Even the Hanamagura who'd been smashed against the scorpion's shell ended up dead when their horn, which was fused with their head, broke. The way they fought by tragically throwing away their lives was one that could naturally be cursed as utterly barbaric. It would be wrong of Subaru to close his eyes to this and dismiss it as there's no problem with that since they're a witch beast. However, he also wasn't planning on glossing things over by saying all lives are created equally. Life had value to it, and without a doubt, there were differences in their values. There were clear differences in the way he felt about the weight of the lives of those who were precious to him and those who weren't. He wasn't going to hide that behind any deceptions. That's why he was going to make full use of the witch beast's lives to win this fight. Therefore, Subaru, though you're doing the right thing overlooking me, you're still making a big mistake. With the witch beast vanguard repelled, Subaru confidently stepped through the floor, which was now coated red. Carrying Beatrice in his left arm, he drew out his whip with his right and swung it up. Dubbed the guilty whip, its blasphemous finishing touches had been done using the corpse of his former foe. Natsuki Subaru cracked it through the air. His super quick whiplash scored a direct hit on the giant scorpion's shell. The scorpion let out a thunderous cry and glared at Subaru with its red compound eyes. There were no signs that he'd caused any damage to it, nor that it was feeling any pain. But he was fine with that. His aim hadn't been to inflict any damage on it. That had probably been why it had put off dealing with Subaru until last, after the other witch beasts. The Great Scorpion's decision was both right and wrong. Subaru, WHRAAAAA. Beatrice, we caught a big one, in fact. His whip had snared itself around the scorpion's shell. With that, the scorpion's massive body would shoot up when he tugged with all his might, thanks to the recoil. This was made possible by the fact that the effects of Beatrice's magic were still in play, drastically decreasing the weight of the titanic beast. The giant scorpion immediately tried to plant itself firmly on the ground. However, the vast quantities of blood and entrails at its feet made the conditions extremely poor for getting a firm grip. Subaru reeled the scorpion up in one swoop as it tried to cling onto the floor with its sharp talons. From an outsider's perspective, the situation almost looked like Subaru was swinging the giant beast about using some form of superhuman strength. But this grandiose spectacle on display had only been made possible thanks to Beatrice's help. And so he kept swinging the giant scorpion's body as much as he could with his whip, until finally, he hurled it away. Subaru, bon voyage. The giant scorpion's body spun around in midair, carrying its supergiant swinging momentum. As it spun around uncontrollably, it tried to hit Subaru with a white ray of light, showing pinpoint targeting. However, Beatrice raised her hand up to knock it away. She materialized glowing purple crystals in midair, and used them to shoot the white ray of light down head-on. As their coordination sprung to life, Subaru released the giant scorpion from his whip and it flew away towards the sky once more. Subaru, this should buy us more time. Subaru found a reprieve out of this mess with this precarious attack, although he had to allow some concessions to win out in the end. However, his eyes widened in surprise before he could finish what he was saying. Right before his eyes, the giant scorpion began to perform an astonishing feat of acrobatics as it hurtled away. With a slash from its enormous pincers, it severed its own tail at the root. Just like that, its tail flew away, scattering dark red bodily fluids in its wake. Yet, a white ray of light was fired off from the very tip of it. It slammed against the now tailless scorpion and blew it back towards the balcony of the watchtower with tremendous force. All that work in making it lighter and practically weightless, and now it had made it back to the balcony, bringing a shockwave with it. It dug its enormous pincers into the floor to stop its momentum, before then pointing its glare at them. Subaru, those were some acrobatics you did. But if that means you've lost your tail, then all the better for us. Scorpion? Subaru, hey, wait a sec. The giant scorpion had landed and lowered its body, putting itself on guard as more darkish red blood poured out from its tail. But its wound hadn't gotten any deeper. Quite the opposite, in fact. Its severed tail was regrowing from its stump. And it wasn't only its tail. The cracks in its shell that had come from firing the white ray of light at itself, so to blow it back, were also bubbling away. He could see those wounds filling in as well. Subaru, it's tough, smart and heals, aren't we just getting more and more of these Unshala-like features? Healing aside, Shala's body was soft, and she wasn't in the least bit smart. Nevertheless, the giant scorpion had shed all of these traits and was now coming at them with its overwhelming killing power. It haphazardly swung its newly grown tail about, releasing its stingers all around into the surroundings. Its attack was a ranged one that showed no signs of its typical tails, so it was safe to say that it was the worst kind of attack for Subaru and Beatrice to be subjected to, given how much they fell short in strength. Subaru, hohuya. Beatrice, guh. Subaru, we'll have to fly, I suppose. They had no means to escape from the white rays of light the scorpion had fired off, at least on terra firma. That said, a means of escape had presented itself in the skies. Beatrice quickly released her magic from the scorpion and called back to Subaru. Subaru kicked off from the ground and jumped up into the air with all his might, trusting in his partner, regardless of whether her magic was actually going to work. The white rays of light began to shatter the balcony, with one of them just barely grazing his feet. Subaru, that was really close. Beatrice, don't speak so soon, in fact. They'd literally jumped over the possibility of death, but they had no time for relief. The same thing had happened as before when Subaru and Beatrice had laid their attack onto the giant scorpion. Escaping up to the skies meant that they'd lost both their foothold and escape route. All that was left for them was to be destroyed by one of the scorpion's attacks. Subaru, Bako. Original spell, Part 2. Although this trump card could only be used 3 times a day, there was no way they could risk messing up by not using it and dying as a result. The moment Subaru squeezed her shoulders tightly, Beatrice came to the same conclusion as well. She'd have their special technique ready for deployment in a jiffy, which would make Subaru invincible for a set amount of time. Ka. Subaru, whoa. Beatrice, wah. She and Subaru were grabbed from the side before she could cast the technique. A white ray of light passed through the space which they'd been in a moment ago, almost evaporating them. The only thing that had saved them from that demise, and was keeping them from being pursued by the great scorpion was Subaru, that was close. What even happened? Goo-ha. Beatrice, I suppose. Subaru checked to see what was going on as he clinged to something rubbery. His voice caught in astonishment, likewise Beatrice also had quite the frown on her face. This was because the one who'd saved them from the giant scorpion's attack, and was still giving it their all to protect them, was a mauve-colored, vicious-looking witch beast, a hungry horse king. Subaru, I never thought we'd be here fighting together at the climax when I first saw you down in the underground. Hungry horse king, ka. The hungry horse king let out an ear-splitting cry in reply to Subaru's bluff. His face tensed up at that, then, another hungry horse king pulled over next to them. Clinging to that horse king's back was Meili's small body. Meili, it looked to me like you were about to pull out your trump card, weren't you? Try to be a little more careful. Oni-san's and Beatrice John's trump card is a lifeline for me as well after all. Subaru, nice save. Nice support. You did well, Meili. Can we change the field of battle at this rate? Meili, you mean, you want us to change locations? I sure can, but... Subaru, then please go for it. We have too few escape routes here, for starters. Scanning the surroundings, Subaru decided to beat a retreat from the balcony, since there weren't many places left to stand on. Tons of witch beast corpses were already littered about there, and with how things were, weird accidents would be prone to happen. Meili gave some thought to the efficiency of his decision and then nodded. She clapped her hungry horse king on its back and gave the 2 of them their orders. As soon as they heard her words, the 2 horse kings picked up their pace and jumped down from the balcony, onto the wall of the watchtower. They began to run down it without wasting any time, at breakneck speeds. Subaru, wah. Beatrice, wabba, in fact. Subaru and Beatrice yelled out in tandem, hugging each other as they faced this unexpected hard ride. At the same time though, he could only take his hat off at Meili, for being able to tame hungry horse kings of all things, and have them be part of their troops. Subaru. With the supremely powerful hungry horse kings at their head, the Hanamagura flying through the skies, the colossal sandworms, courtesan bears and other countless witch beasts on the ground as their allies, they had quite a wide range of strategy available to them. It could be said that they were the ideal partners for Subaru, since his plan was to keep stalling for time by dishing out one delay tactic after the other. Subaru, we're really being spoiled for choice with how many ways we have to attack. You and I may be way more compatible than I'd ever thought, Meili. Meili, don't say that, Oni-san. I really wouldn't want Petra and Beatrice John glaring at me. Subaru exchanged shouts with Meili as they galloped down the watchtower in vertical fashion. The latter gave Subaru a sullen frown in response to his casual chit-chat as she clung onto her hungry horse king's back. Her reaction slightly hurt his innocent male sensibilities, but right now was the time to ignore such trivial wounds. Subaru, round 2's gonna start when we drop onto the sand sea. She's gonna come after me. So for the time being, she shouldn't interfere with anyone inside the tower. Meili, but we're still stuck without a way to beat her, yeah? No matter how much time we spend running around, we're not gonna be able to grab a win, right? Since they were in the Augria sand dunes, they had witch beasts in endless supply. Thus their witch beast ammo wasn't ever going to run out. However, all that gave them was the ability to continue waging their battle, rather than a surefire way to beat the scorpion. Subaru. He glanced over at Meili. Sweat was dripping from her forehead, which she was wiping away at, and her breaths were slightly labored. That was in part due to how strange she was, being caught smack dab in between the hammer and anvil that was the battlefield. However, he couldn't help but think that it was also in part due to the toll which controlling witch beasts had on her. Though this was something which Subaru couldn't really comprehend, since he didn't hold a divine protection, there was enough of a chance for a divine protection to become toxic when overused. Subaru, Otto did joke about this, saying stuff like the world was hellish back when he couldn't control his divine protection. Maybe those words that Otto had spluttered out when drunk were nothing to sneeze at. If divine protections became burdensome like Otto had said, then there'd be a limit to how much Melee could fight as well. Their defeat would instantly be set in stone were Melee to fall in battle. In other words, Subaru, indeed, this battle will be decided by how much I coddle Melee as a princess. Beatrice, what an inexcusable plan, I suppose. Right after Beatrice raised her eyebrows in response to Subaru's declaration, a shock ran through their entire bodies. It served as a sign that the hungry Horse Kings had reached their final stop after running down the tower at breakneck speeds. Meaning they'd broken past the vertical wall of the watchtower and arrived back at the Sandsea. Subaru, it's not like it's gone anywhere at the end of the day. But when you drop down to it like this, it feels way more different. Beatrice, how does it feel, in fact? Subaru, absolutely awful. I hate how deserts are just full of sand. It reminds me of how I never liked the desert stages you often got in games as well. Sometimes, depending on the game system, the HP of his character would start ticking down by doing nothing but walking in the searing heat. This Sandsea had nothing to do with the scorching sand you got in those, but even so, he didn't have any fond memories of it. Made all the worse by the fact that they were surrounded by countless swarms of witch beasts. Subaru, though, I know they aren't going to attack us. A sickly sweet aroma that made him want to wrinkle his nose was floating about, accompanied by a far worse beastly stench. He could pretty much say that the air around the Sandsea was one of the crummiest in the world. Though with the environment being filled with tons of witch beasts, some familiar, others not, perhaps witch beast researchers or whatever would drool over that? Unfortunately, it only made Subaru and his team feel uneasy. Melee, so, what's your answer to my question? Melee rode her hungry Horse King over to Subaru and Beatrice as the former shuddered. She wanted an answer to her question. Subaru glanced up at the tower and then replied. Subaru, it's as you say, we can't do anything about the giant scorpion, about Shala. That's why Amelia Tan holds the key to everything. Melee, are you talking about that silver-haired one Isand from earlier? Subaru, yeah. Amelia Tan and the fifth rule are the key to everything. Subaru gave the puzzled Melee a nod before sticking his palm up in front of her. He spread out all 5 of his fingers, marking the rules imposed on them as challengers of the Pleiades Watchtower. Subaru, we can't leave without completing the trials. We can't break the trial rules. We aren't allowed to disrespect the libraries. We mustn't damage the tower. And finally, Melee, Melee should have heard the first 4 rules. But she didn't know the 5th one. Shala had been trying to hide it, so only Subaru, who'd returned by death, knew what it was. As well as Shala herself, of course. The 5th rule that Shala had zipped her lips shut and refused to tell them was, Subaru, it is not forbidden to destroy the trials. Meaning we can destroy the rules of this tower. As challengers, the trials constrained their actions. At the same time though, the rules also constrained Shala's actions since she was one of their examiners. Shala was bound by the rules of the tower. So, even though she didn't want to kill them, she couldn't escape from the fate that bound her to try and do so through her giant scorpion transformation. If those shackles had been binding her for over 400 years, then... Beatrice, TCH. She's coming, I suppose. A great plume of smoke rose before their eyes just after her warning. An accompanying shockwave came from the giant silhouette that had leaped down from the balcony without any hesitation, rather than running straight down the tower. He could hear the heavy grating sound of its large pincers coming from the thick of the smoke. The giant scorpion slowly emerged from within, its compound eyes were pointed directly at Subaru instead of at the countless enemies around them. Subaru, Biko, Melee. We need to buy some time. Amelia Tan's victory is the condition for ours. Beatrice, I get you loud and clear, in fact. Melee, and exactly how long is she going to take to achieve that? Subaru, as fast as she possibly can. Amelia was always earnest and extremely hard-working. Thus, there was no way she was going to compromise or slack off with the problems they were facing. The results she delivered were always the best she could give, and with it came the highest firepower she could muster. Subaru believed in that, he loved that, he cherished that. That's why he was going to be able to stand his ground here. Subaru, now then, let's do this. We're gonna break fate. No, we're gonna break the tower's system. I see, so that's why you're... Yeah, it's like that. Subaru told me that I'd definitely find a way to rewrite the situation we're in if I go up to the very top of the tower. Amelia focused on running as fast as she could, giving her only a brisk reply. She was holding Echidna in her arms as she ran, with the latter trying to make her body as small as possible. At first Amelia had taken her by the hand as they ran, but being slowed down by her, she'd ended up picking her up partway through, and she'd remained like that ever since. In fact, it was much faster this way and it strained her body far less, so it was a huge help. Even so. Echidna, shouldn't it be you who needs to save their strength? You haven't got a clue what's lying in wait for you, right? Amelia, huh? Oh, you don't need to worry. Anastasia-san's body is really light, and it's not like it's gotten any heavier even with you in it. It's no sweat off my back. Echidna, my presence doesn't really have anything to do with Anna's weight. Like, not at all. Faced with those slightly amiss answers, Echidna looked at Amelia, rather, at the beauty of the unfamiliar half-elf as she felt the struggles within herself. This unfamiliar half-elf was one of her companions who'd had her very name stolen away by the authority of gluttony. Her circumstances were pretty much like Julius, but the way she was behaving was far different compared to him. Were their intrinsic personalities different? Or was it perhaps a difference in the people who were there to support them? Echidna, doesn't it terrify you that you've been forgotten? Amelia, it's really scary and lonely. But I don't have the time to sit down and curl up in fear, wouldn't you think? Amelia gave a brutally honest reply to Echidna's hushed question. The strength behind her change seemed like a testament of her mental fortitude, or perhaps it was down to some other factor. Amelia had said before, I'm not worried because Subaru remembers me. They'd been awfully simple words, the stuff you'd see in dreams. Yet, at the same time, they seemed to be the truth. Echidna. It wasn't clear what made Natsuki Subaru impervious to the effects of the authority of gluttony. Though strictly speaking it wasn't like even he was completely impervious to it. In fact, hadn't he said that the reason he'd lost his memories had been due to an unexpected encounter with gluttony? So Echidna couldn't definitively say that Subaru's specialness was the main cause behind everything that occurred. Meaning, there should have still been a certain possibility. As in, couldn't they have protected their names and memories somehow? If they could have done that, then both Anastasia and Julius. Echidna. When she stopped to think about how Julius felt, having been forgotten by everyone, could anyone even blame him for faltering? Though, when she looked at Amelia's strength after she'd been placed in the same situation, she couldn't help but wonder what was different between the two. The difference must have come in who was at their side. The difference must have been in who was beside them, supporting them. Likewise, wouldn't Julius not have collapsed if he'd had some support? And shouldn't someone have been there like Natsuki Subaru had for Amelia? Echidna, what should I do? Echidna couldn't find an answer to that question within herself. It was so bad that she felt like this may have been the first time in her life as an empty artificial spirit where she'd been at such a loss with herself. Amelia, Echidna? Echidna, it's nothing. More importantly, is it true? That you managed to find a way through Rita Stria's violence and passed the second floor's trial before? Amelia, yeah, it is. It's really hard to explain now that you've forgotten. Amelia gave her an adorable puff of her cheeks. But, the fact of the matter was, she was embarrassed by how she'd beaten the trial of that man, who was the very picture of violence itself. Echidna never for one moment imagined that she'd be lying in this situation. Despite only knowing her for a short time, Echidna could tell that her nature wasn't suited to telling fibs. So everything must have been true. It had only been for a few moments, but judging by how she'd stood up against the giant scorpion on the balcony, there was no doubt that she was quite the capable fighter. So, the only remaining issue was, Echidna, so, you can find a way to fix this situation if you go up to the very top of the tower. What's your basis for that? Amelia, Subaru told me that he heard what the fifth rule was from Shala. Plus, Subaru's thought long and hard about this before coming up with the idea, so I'm pretty sure it's the right way to go about things. Echidna, to me that seems like an idea based on excessive blind faith, but... Amelia, if you're still full of doubts, we can address them, but I don't think now's the time for it. That, and didn't you come here with me because you believe in Subaru as well? Echidna was lost for words as Amelia turned her crystal clear eyes over to her. Seeing Echidna's reaction, Amelia gave her a smile that was tinged with delight, even if it seemed a tad out of place. Amelia, you see, my esteemed knight is really giving it his all for us. Amelia showed with her attitude that she was proud of the fact that their hard work was being appreciated. In response to that, Echidna likewise felt an odd pang of emotion. She placed her palm over Anastasia's flat chest and breathed out a sigh. Echidna. These sorts of emotions are dangerous, Echidna warned herself. They were completely irrational and out of place. At the very least, it wasn't something she ought to feel at a time like this. She needed to forget them if she could, and if not, then at the very least she should forget them for the time being. Emilia, Subaru's relying on me. Echidna felt, amongst other things, envious of her. She, who believed so much in her companion, who was that much closer to her. I need to forget this present moment and focus on overcoming the situation we're in, Echidna thought to herself. Echidna. Emilia's long legs moved gracefully as she flew up the stairs. Then, after they'd climbed up what should have been quite a lot of steps, a tremendous flash of silver came into view, scattering sparks everywhere. With their vision now unobstructed, they saw a battle unfolding wherever they looked. With his lilac hair aflutter and white uniform stained with blood, stood Julius Euculius. And the person he was up against was Julius, Guhkhh. Wohoa wohoa wohoa. Doesn't look like yet can do anything about me like that, you prick. Don't go underestimating me, you prick. Did you come here to mess about? If you wanna mess about, then go put on some makeup. When you do, I'm gonna step on ya, bully ya, and ruffle ya about, you damn prick. The very embodiment of violence, Reed Astrea let loose a nightmarish slash with the pair of chopsticks he held in his hands as he swore. He was dancing a danse macabre, with the second floor as his stage. Theirs was a battle that transcended what humanity could fathom. Even so, the fact that Julius was far inferior in strength to him was something that was so sadly obvious that it could be grasped instantly, even to the untrained eye. Julius, TCH. Dealing with the flurry of slashes and kicks coming from Reed, Julius countered by spinning his night sword around and thrusting it into one of the gaps. His sharp thrust, derived from extraordinary technique, seemed to be nothing more than a blur of light. Yet Reed easily avoided it with a yawn, and that was with his eye patch blocking part of his sight. Reed, RRRHAAA. Julius looked on, stunned that Reed had avoided his thrust. Immediately afterwards, a casual-looking kick slammed into Julius' torso, with the soles of his zori digging straight into his abdominal muscles. Julius took a few steps back and let out a pained cry. Then, a blow from one of his chopsticks dropped down towards his head. Reed, get pulverized, you prick. With a vertical flash, his slash, which came with a shockwave, cut through the air, space, and reason itself. His sword slash was so overwhelming that ways to even express it no longer came to their minds. It was so beautiful that even though his weapon had been a chopstick, one couldn't help but be captivated by it. Even if they were an amateur at swordplay, it was the pinnacle of swordplay, the very culmination of it, which was what was being manifested there. A slash so beautiful that you would probably die from just admiring it. Julius leapt aside, dodging it. The hem of his cloak didn't make it in time and was swallowed by Reed's blade, evaporating. A vertical groove was left carved into the second floor of the watchtower, which was made of unknown materials, as if it were all a jape. And to make matters worse, Reed, hey hi, aren't ya being naive if you're thinking you've escaped with that? Julius, look. Giving him a mocking smile, the air he'd cut through in the room warped and bent, with a gust of wind starting to roar. Julius, who should have managed to jump aside, gulped, and then was instantly dragged back to his feet, as if he were being pulled back towards the torn space, back into the range of Reed's sword slashes. To their disbelief, this was due to the force of gravity from the torn space restoring itself. It was pulling Julius back after his narrow brush with death straight into the range of the next blow. Reed began to throw a punch at Julius, unable to move due to what was happening. Emilia, that's enough. A split second before he released his punch, the sound of a chiming silver bell interjected between the two swordsmen. However, in contrast to the beautiful chime of her voice, the way she joined the fight was rather audacious. Echidna became lost for words, faced with that extreme spectacle in front of her. Reed, ha! Julius. Reed looked up above him, unable to conceal the suspicion in his voice. Julius, on the other hand, opened his eyes wide in surprise, utterly speechless. They were looking at the strange thing that had appeared above them, a block of ice that was so big that it covered the ceiling. This block of destruction that could instantly shatter even a dragon carriage into smithereens fell down towards the two swordsmen. Reed and Julius' reactions were contrastingly different. Julius leapt away to avoid the hurtling ice block, while Reed curved his lips up into a smile and laughed. Reed, ha! With a fierce smile on his face, Reed thrust up one of his chopsticks at the falling block of ice. His raised chopstick collided with the point of fall of the block. By some miracle, the forces between the 2 points stood at an equilibrium with each other, causing Reed's chopstick to bend, but preventing its fall. Reed stamped his zora down firmly onto the floor. The force of it traveled through his chopstick and flowed into the ice block, which was still being held up by said chopstick. A crack began to run up the block as his chopstick snapped in half. Reed, now wasn't that something? Reed spat those words out, and a split second later, the block of ice with a crack running through its center, shattered in the blink of an eye. Chunks of ice began to rain down, and while basking in them, Reed slowly turned himself around. Receiving the piercing gaze from his blue, uncovered eye, Amelia pointed her palm at him, with a look of resolve setting in on her face. Their gazes crossed each other's, causing Reed to ogle at her in surprise. "Reed, you're a real feisty one, ain'tcha? It's not like I dislike women like you, but... Ha! What the hell, you twat, you're really damn hot, ain'tcha? One hell of a smokin' hottie. Why the hell's there such a smokin' hottie in the middle of this sand sea? Come on, you're gonna be my opponent, you twat." "Amelia, my apologies, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I do need to get Julius to beat you." "Reed, wah?" Amelia paid no heed to Reed's egoistic talk, and instead continued with a troubled look appearing on her face. Reed frowned at what she had said, but Julius was the one who was far more bewildered, having just been rescued. Though he'd managed to escape from the block of ice that Amelia had unleashed, he couldn't hide his suspicion towards the fact that she'd suddenly appeared. Keeping himself at a distance from Reed, he turned his yellow eyes to look over at Echidna, who was standing beside her, and spoke. "Julius, I get that she helped me, but who on earth is she, Echidna?" "Echidna, it's kinda hard for me to explain her identity. But, if I may put it simply, she's someone who's in the same boat as you, Julius." "Julius, what the?" Julius stared at Amelia once again, with his eyes widening slightly, probably because her features coincided with a being he knew about. "Julius, a silver-haired, amethyst-eyed elf. No, I find it hard to believe that such a distinctive being would have suddenly turned up in the tower. Then, could it be that she's..." In light of the situation in the tower, as well as the peculiarities of her appearance, and the fact that her presence was nowhere to be found within him, Julius felt, out of his own accord, that something was not quite right. Julius came to the answer by himself. Seeing his startled eyes, Amelia gave him a firm nod. "Amelia, Julius, right now I know exactly how you feel." "Julius, then you indeed are." Given that they'd both had their names snatched away by gluttony, Julius immediately grasped what was going on. And as soon as he did, his conviction that Amelia was their ally appeared to grow. He stood in front of both Echidna and Amelia, protecting them, once again pointing his sword at Reed. "Julius, you have my thanks for helping me out earlier. But I still don't quite get why you two have come rushing here considering what's going on in the tower. What's happening with the Tejeda library, and with Miss Rem and the situation outside?" "Echidna, there's an attempt underway to try and bring all these matters together so to deal with them all at once. The idea is not Suki-kuan's, and the ones helping him with it are all of us in the tower." "Julius, it's Subaru's? But he's..." A puzzled frown appeared on Julius' face as he heard Subaru's name wedged in the middle of her explanation. As far as he knew, Subaru should have faced Reed's Book of the Dead in the Tejeda library, and his consciousness should have been in a state of disarray from his return. Beatrice had told him that his return had been difficult, thus, Julius had continued to fight against Reed so that they could overcome the turmoil in the tower in his own way. Therefore, even if she was saying Subaru had woken up and came up with this idea, you could say it was only natural that there was no real link between spontaneity and recognition. Nevertheless, "Reed, I haven't got anything against y'all getting all chummy with each other, but don't you pricks go jabbering away while ignoring me." The floor exploded with a loud bang, resulting in Julius receiving a blow from the intruding Reed's chopstick. Although he'd lost one chopstick, he still had another one left. And it wasn't like he had to use them. Even if he just fought empty-handed, it wasn't like his strength was going to diminish. "Julius, K.H." While buffeted by Reed's sharp attacks, Julius rallied himself and focused on keeping his desperate defense up. Seeing that, Reed unleashed a blow with one of his hands that could have literally felled even a dragon. At the same time, he stuck out his spare hand at Amelia as she searched for an opening, thrusting his fingers out at her. "Reed, I ain't got a clue what you're trying to pull off, but I don't think I'm gonna let you do as you please, you twat. I'm gonna be your opponent after I'm done dealing with this novice." "Ha?" Reed abruptly tilted his head in doubt mid-sentence. He then brought his fingers of his spare hand to his eye-patched left eye and spat out a venomous tirade of, hey, s. "Reed, the hell, you twat. For some reason my hand ain't moving to stop ya. Unless I've suddenly become smitten by ya. No way, you must have passed the trial." "Amelia, yeah, I did. You lost because you touched my chest with your chopsticks." "Reed, ka. Now that's one way of losing that I can really get behind. What a huge waste that I can't even remember it, you smokin' hottie." Reed clucked his tongue. His words indicated that there was some shackle on him that wouldn't let him stop Amelia. In other words, it meant that the obstruction standing in between her and her duty was now gone. "Amelia, Julius, I." "Julius, you may go, my lovely lady, you, who like me, are of unknown name." Turning only his head around, he interrupted Amelia as she was about to say something. Seeing his knightsword now held at the ready again, Amelia kept her silence at his words. Seeing the surprise on her face, Julius gave her a gallant smile. Julius, you have your duty to carry out. I know it's something I won't be able to help you with, but that's fine with me. I pray everything goes well. Emilia, yeah, for you too. Receiving Julius' encouragement, Emilia nodded at him and then broke out into a run. Reed didn't make any attempt at stopping her. The one-eyed red lion let her pass by him and saw her off. Then, as Emilia reached the front of the staircase in the innermost part of the second floor that would lead the way up, she stopped in her tracks and turned around. Emilia, it's Emilia. Julius. Emilia, my name is Emilia, just Emilia. I'll definitely see you again later. Leaving her name behind, Emilia ran up the stairs with an air of elegance about her. Echidna let out a long sigh as she watched her disappear from sight. From here on out, Emilia's duty was to head to the top. So, Echidna's duty was to. Julius, you're not going anywhere? Are you planning on watching me fight? Echidna, only if you'll let me do so. Well, no, I suppose not. I'm the one who's decided to do that. Julius. Julius glanced towards Echidna, who was standing by the wall, and then pursed his lips together. She took a quick gasp of air as she witnessed all kinds of emotions flitting across the profile of his face. Echidna, it's not like I can do anything, but if Anna were here, she would have probably done this. No matter where I am in this tower, I will always be subject to danger. Given that, I shall stand behind you out of my own volition. Because. Julius. Echidna, because you are Anastasia Hashin's knight. Isn't that right? It took a tremendous amount of courage to believe in something that didn't feel real. It was nigh impossible to grasp just how much strength it took to believe in something that had no concrete basis, to the point that it would make her feel relieved, at least when compared to believing in something that was actually tangible. Regardless, Echidna spoke those words to the man before her eyes, his back facing away from her, while believing in that uncertainty. Julius. Julius lowered his long-lashed eyes in response and softly let out a deep, long sigh. Julius, you're able to give me more strength than you give yourself credit for. Merely from the fact that someone went and summoned their courage to believe and hold expectations in a me who may not be anyone anymore. Echidna, Julius. For Julius, the footing he'd lost had become uncertain. For Echidna, the bonds which she was supposed to know had become ambiguous. The two of them had to rely on something so shaky to build this relationship which altogether differed to the one that they should have been bound by. Nevertheless, at this very moment, the two of them must have surely been seeing the same thing. So for that reason. Echidna, Julius, I have a message for you. Julius, a message? Echidna, yeah. Everyone's fighting all over the tower, so, he said to hurry your ass and settle things here, then come help the others. Julius. Echidna could tell that this was his kind of encouragement, thus she conveyed it to him exactly as she'd heard. Julius' slender shoulders tensed slightly after he heard it. He digested the contents of the message and took it on board. His response following it was loud and clear. Julius, ha. It almost seemed like he'd let out a short, sharp gasp of air, but it wasn't like that at all. He'd let out a laugh. He'd breathed out a single gasp of air from the pit of his stomach to ease out that laugh. The fact that Julius Euculius was facing battle with a smile on his face would have been a thing to marvel about, had there been anyone here who knew Julius. Julius, if he's broken out of his shell, then I mustn't lose here either. His expression of determination was quiet, yet full of hidden zeal. Julius raised his knight sword in front of him and faced his foe, reflecting himself in his blade. Reed had been lodging a bored look on his face for a while. But now, he was grinning like a shark. Reed, you really kicked into gear, didn't ya, you prick? Julius, pardon me, but when it comes to fighting, I always take it seriously. Reed, no, that ain't what I mean. You get it right? Even if I don't spell it out for you prick. Reed lifted his left hand up with a grin still plastered on his face. He flipped his eye patch up and uncovered his eye. Thus, with his perfectly functioning blue eyes, the peak of all swordsmen pointed his cheerful murderous intent towards his challenger. His sword spirit was so formidable that anyone faint of heart would have been killed by the glint in his eyes alone. However, Julius met that sharp glint of his head on, and Echidna behind him likewise braced herself and endured it. Seeing the two of them endure the raging storm of his sword spirit, Reed loudly clacked his fangs together. Reed, I am the stick swinger Reed. Remember only my name, before you disappear. Julius. Exchanging one's name in battle before crossing swords was a sign of recognizing a warrior as their equal. There was no knowing how much Reed really cared about that norm, but regardless of what he thought, the considerations of the person who'd basked in that had changed dramatically. Julius took a breath and prepared himself, stilling his raging heart. Julius, I shall give you my name once again. I am Julius Euculius. One and only knight to Anastasia Hashinsama, who stands as a royal selection candidate in the kingdom of Lubunica. It's time for me to give up acting the part of a nameless knight. He magnificently proclaimed his name so that it would be engraved in both he and the world itself. Leaving behind Julius and Echidna downstairs, Emilia continued to run up the steps. Her long legs were moving as fast as she could muster, skipping up the stairs 2 or 3 steps at a time. Though the speed she was going at was inordinate, her own thoughts were screaming at her to go faster and faster. Emilia, GNH. Emilia strongly gritted her teeth, a look of desperation was adorning her beautiful face in profile. She was worried about the 2 she'd left behind downstairs on the 2nd floor. Reed was extremely strong, foul-mouthed and a thug to boot. The 2 of them could easily get hurt both physically and mentally dealing with him. Naturally, Emilia's worries didn't just stop at Julius and Echidna. Would Subaru, Beatrice and Meili manage to keep Shala in check? Would Ram be able to play her part too? Would Pratrash keep guard over Rem? Her anxieties, such as whether she was going to have to rebuild all her relationships from scratch with her name eaten, were never-ending. She felt like she was going to burst into tears if she took a moment to stop. However, she didn't stop. She didn't shed any tears either. She endured the tingling sensation at the back of her throat. Emilia, nothing is over yet after all. The fact that they believed in her, and that they were able to believe in her, was what was propping Emilia's entirety up right now. She was full of worries, brimming with anxiety, but she was also full of I believe in you, which trumped over those emotions. Emilia, hook. There's a light. As she continued to pour her heart and soul in running up the stairs, Emilia's amethyst eyes caught a glimpse of a white glow at the far end of her field of view. She realized that it was coming from the end of this extremely long staircase, and that it would lead to the unknown first floor. The moment she comprehended that, she firmly kicked off from the floor and sped up even more. Then, finally. Emilia, I made it out. Emilia broke through into the light, where the staircase had ended in front of her. What unfurled itself before her eyes that instant wasn't an area that you could call a floor. Emilia, huh? Emilia stopped in her tracks, completely flabbergasted, and unintentionally let out her surprise at the scene she was faced with. Reflected in her amethyst eyes, was not the next part of the familiar watchtower she'd come to expect. The walls had disappeared, as had the ceiling. Spread out all around her lay the vibrant blue sky. Emilia wasn't standing inside the building, but rather, she was outside. She'd ended up emerging right on the rooftop at the top of the tower after running up the 2nd floor stairs. Emilia, the 1st floor's outside. This place is up even higher than the clouds. There was a vast, circular floor at the summit of the tower with no other partitions or anything that looked like a handrail at its edge. Therefore, she could easily look down below by going over to the edge of the floor. Clouds which should have been far above in the sky were brushing against the tower. Emilia's breath caught as she realized she'd come all the way up to the clouds, or was even above them. It was the first time Emilia had ever come to a place as high as this. However, despite receiving such a shock, she was quickly distracted by another profound emotion. There was a presence there that she hadn't been able to notice on account of how still and grand it kept itself. Emilia, Emilia had been busy looking at stuff like where she was, the height of the clouds, and what the situation was like on the 1st floor. She'd been late in noticing the being that had swept past the corner of her eyes. She slowly turned around and let out a large gasp. Even though Emilia had almost fallen into despair from being forgotten by the world with her name being taken from her, her heart had still stood firm in the end. But even that, Emilia was lost for words in sheer awe. The being that had appeared before her eyes was utterly beyond the pale of her imagination. Because that being was Emilia, thou, who hath reached the top of the tower. Step forth through the 1st floor, almighty petitioner. Its voice was solemn, and it felt like it was being roared directly into her soul. She realized that her voice was trembling. Was there anyone who could fault Emilia and call her weak-minded? No one would be able to. It would be impossible. Because all living creatures had no choice but to prostrate themselves before this being. Because this being's name was I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. With his huge body covered in glittering blue scales, the divine dragon Volcanica looked down upon Emilia and declared that while exerting a presence that seemed like it would blow even her very soul out of existence. Outside of the tower, commenced the battle of Shala, who had transformed into the titanic scorpion, against Subaru and the rest. In the 2nd floor of the tower, the swordplay of the grinning wielder of violence, Rita Stria and Julius reopened. On the first floor of the tower, Emilia achieved an unforeseen encounter with the mighty existence awaiting there. And, on the spiral staircase connecting the 4th floor and 6th floor of the tower. Ah, damn it, Sue. Even after stealing it and everything, it just feels like not having put it to decent use, doesn't it, Jesus? Spitting away in irritation, the young boy clicked his tongue whilst tearing at his dark brown hair. Upon swinging down the hand scratching his head, what had been generated therein was a beautiful, ornate sword shaped with ice. With the stolen name as the foundation, it was a special power which he had reconstructed, but contrary to its appearance, its regulation of mana was exquisitely arduous, and was quite difficult to use jointly with other memories. In the first place, combining the skills of multiple others required a suitable sense, and that was something which Roy and Lewis were maladroit at. Well, it's because we excel in it that we are so able, but you know. Even within the trio of siblings possessing the authority of gluttony, each one's way of using the authority subtly differed. Amongst them, as one who took pride in being gourmet, the points he would like to object to in his younger brother and sister's ways weren't few. Fortes connected to sense of superiority. Though something like advice was unbefitting of him. The message won't get across to dear cute Lewis, or that chap Roy. Ah, it can't be helped, Sue. If the two of them are saying they can't do anything, then it can't be helped. That means that we can thoroughly lick the feasts present inside this tower down to the roots, Sue. How nice, so nice, quite nice, very nice, as it's nice, it certainly is nice, surely it is nice, surely it must be nice, as it must be nice. Gluttonous drinking Sue. Glutton eats Sue. Crunching the sword of ice in his hand, with his sharp fangs unraveled, Gluttony lay Baton-Katos decided to itemize all of the targets inside the tower for his own platter, without leaving a single one. Fortunately, the situation had been served. What remained was to simply select the order, and what was to be the main course. Do you think you have the privilege to be choosing that? How very easygoing. Lay. Upon the voice descending from the top of the spiral staircase, Lay ceased chewing the ice, and raised his head. Overhead, on the 4th floor were light crimson eyes looking at Lay, who was standing on the staircase between the 4th floor and the 5th floor. With the same hue as blood or blaze, eyes with terribly icy heat, were looking down upon Lay's ferocious hunger as if pitying. And Ram, from what was said, it seems you were the one who tore apart Ram and Rem's sisterly love, isn't it? Kindly die whilst baying like a pig. Chapter 80, Death of the Mind. It was the scent of rage. Fragrant, rich, it was the scent of highly pure rage. Prodigiously churning this slender, petite body, he understood that it would uplift it to greater heights. Lay ahahatsu. Facing each other from the upper and lower ends of the spiral staircase, Baton-Katos laughed with sadness and gloom upon Ram's caustic remark. The young girl with potent emotions conceived in her light crimson eyes, breathing in the resentment and hatred she directed towards him, Baton-Katos tasted ecstasy. Should he state without giving much thought to selecting the wording, saying that this one breath was what he was living for wouldn't be an exaggeration. Lay, how nice, so nice, quite nice, very nice, as it's nice, isn't it nice? As there normally aren't any people who'd face us with such an enraged expression, you see. It sure is a really valuable feeling, isn't it? Do you understand? We wonder if you do understand the delight which we're feeling right now. Stepping on the ground upon expressing the vivifying emotion, Baton-Katos licked his lips. Yes, this emotion and encounter was something Baton-Katos normally could never hope for. The memories and names stolen through the authority of gluttony got disengaged from the world, and with the exception of Roy and Lewis, it became impossible for anyone to even be cognizant of them. The grief of having lost someone precious, the rage of high station, the hollow sense of loss, anything and everything got evanesced entirely, beyond all help. Lay, so naturally, that's a matter of course. That's why, we've never minded it, you see. Whenever he operated as a member of the much-loathed witch cult, on copious occasions would he meet humans who directed their hatred towards his affiliation. However, never had there been one who knew of Lay Baton-Katos' deeds, who harbored hatred for Lay Baton-Katos individually, who aimed to kill Lay Baton-Katos specifically. That natural divine providence brought forth by the authority of gluttony, that obvious unwritten law, had been overruled. With the emergence of an outsider, who did not sustain the effects of the authority of gluttony. Lay, Natsuki Subaru. Sue. Whispering the name of the man Lewis had been attached to, Baton-Katos attained a sweet ache in the depths of his slim chest. It was not as if he had taken influence by Lewis. He had known about him, even prior to that. He had been thinking of him, powerfully, profoundly, far earlier than even Lewis. That being, Lay Nisama will also understand, right? The connection between the origin of this sweet ache in his chest and the young girl looking down towards him was deep. No, not merely deep. Two hearts that beat as one, irreplaceable individuals, saying that they were the other halves of each other would be unobjectionable as well. Thus, she would surely understand. These sweet, fleeting, far too mighty emotions. This sensation, blended with both love and hate, and the ache within the chest longing for release. That is why he addressed with half of his mouth open, pouring in that conviction and expectation. Ram's already told you. To kindly die whilst baying like a pig. Huck. The subsequent instant, Ram's first move as she flew down after kicking the staircase, made Lei jump far backwards. He had narrowly managed to draw his body back, but the fine point of the wand being pointed out was accurately aiming for his right eye. Should he be slow in pulling back his head, it shall ransack his brain through the eyeball. Geez, Ne-sama is merciless. Had we eaten this one just now, forget about imitating the bay of a pig, we would have died unable to do anything. Ram has reconsidered. If you were made to imitate something below the standard of a pig, then it'll surely be a real affront for the pig as well. Flying through the spiral staircase, his landing was delayed solely due to the difference in the levels of stairs. Whilst apprising her chilling intent to kill, Ram's furious assault waged a pursuit of fierce vigor towards Baten Kato's. Whilst gyrating her slim figure, Ram pointed out her wand, fired a kick, drilled in a shot of the elbow. Baten Kato's dodged them entirely through the handling of his body, but things like the hit which had grazed past his ear certainly possessed the vigor that upon a single hit, would certainly lead to loss of faculty of that part of the body. Ahahatsu. Scary. It's scary though, you know. Baten Kato's laughed whilst using his body to evade the unhesitating strikes in pursuit of him. That wasn't flexibility, but exaltation. No, slight flexibility as well. Ram's martial arts were quite something. Lacking all forgiveness, she possessed no faltering in her aim to kill. Yet, Baten Kato's dodged with leisure and ease. The reason for that was quite simple. We already properly know that Ne-sama is more amazing, you see. The multitude of memories terminated and packed together within Baten Kato's. Within them was a passionate one which adored Ram as an elder sister, which yearned for her infinite potential. The untiring trust and expectation towards Ram which those memories were endowed with, conveyed their contrast with the Ram before his eyes, nearly to a sorrowful extent, to Baten Kato's. To summarize, Ne-sama without her horn, is nothing but a counterfeit which even Ram can substitute for, isn't that right? Ram. Did you get angry? Have you gotten angry? If you want to get angry then you can get angry perfectly fine, Ne-sama. Now that we think of it, we've never even had a proper sisterly quarrel before, you know. Baten Kato's set forth the reminiscences as if a belonging of his own. Though Ram's cheeks stiffened in reaction to his speech and conduct, her attacks did not slacken. Baten Kato's admiringly thought within his innermost heart that she was really quite pushing herself. It was famously known that Onis who lost their horns lost their bodily control, though it was unclear how much anguish it entailed. Ram had also been continually tormented due to that penalty. It was unknown just how many times the thought of wanting to take over her pain had come to mind. However, alongside that also came another thought. That oneself wouldn't be able to endure the anguish she bore. If the agony of losing the horn depended on the strength that Oni originally possessed, then Ram must have the greatest in that regard, which no other Oni in the world could share. Thus, commendation to her onrushing form by way of her own determination, through that compelling anguish. And gratitude to her earnest wolfing stance, with an unruffled facial expression. With the ripening of the greatest, supreme, premier flavor, to simply whom should he express his delight for being witness to the moment the rich aroma arose, he did not know. He hailed gratitude and admiration toward the miracle of happening across this gourmet delicacy. Truly Sue. Ne-sama is so wonderful Sue. A murderous dance blended with love and hate unfolded on the spiral staircase. Whilst tasting that to his heart's content, Baten Kato's blessed Ram's existence. And, tilting his body, turning over, stooping down, dodging as per the memories craved. Now with a tada, time for a counterata. Ram, how truly noisy. Surrounding Ram whilst she pointed out her wand, Baten Kato's aimed for her fair neck. His side which had gotten into her undisputable blind spot, and Ram's line of sight entangled when she turned around. At that single moment, feeling intimidated, Baten Kato's interrupted the strike and flew in evasion and escaped. However, the instant after wind grazed past his right cheek, he felt blood starting to drip out. Tsu. Tracing his cut cheek with his hand, Baten Kato's inhaled faintly. It was a wound he wasn't supposed to sustain. At the very least, the memories present within Baten Kato's, if he were to abide by the existence who best knew the prodigy Ram, then there didn't exist a future where he should have sustained this wound. Yet. Though Ram told you to bay disgracefully, an unsightly opponent's voice is also rough to hear. Ram doesn't intend to keep you company any longer, so you're getting killed. Ne-sama, this is. Ram, if you had been evaluating Ram relying on the memories, then your evaluation is yet too naive. Looking at Baton Kato's after he stained his cheek with blood by his hand, Ram gently brushed her pink hair. With her dreadfully cold sidelong glance towards the side. Ram, were you intending to bring out Ram's true colors? If that's the case, then that is quite laughable. Ram's potential is infinite. After all. Ram is Rem's Nesama. A baseless, careless remark. The reason why it echoed with such extraordinary convincibility was because that is how the memories, present within nobody but Baton Kato's, had captured the existence of their elder sister. Recognizing that reality, Baton Kato's erased his smile and distorted his cheeks in annoyance. Boring. Uninteresting. She doesn't get it. Or both rage and hatred are spices for enhancing flavors. But, if the taste of the spices is too strong, if it asserts itself too powerfully, then even that platter goes to waste. Guess Nesama, who doesn't cook, would be completely clueless about these customs, huh? Ram, that's not true. There's nothing to hide, Ram's special dish is steamed potatoes after all. The memories which had vivid recollection of that resuscitated, and his stomach growled. Intentionally ignoring that call of the sense of emptiness and hunger in his stomach, Baton Kato's casted his mood to play around aside. Ram was still yet to demonstrate the true worth of her strength. In other words, that meant not but that she hadn't revealed everything even to the younger sister who was physically quite similar to her. In other words, Nesama won't trust even her little sister. Talk about the ultimate individualism, isn't it? Ram, what a superficial way of understanding things. Ram doesn't know how many human lives you have tasted, but even those people don't come to mind. Everything aside from Ram is trifle. Repudiating Baton Kato's outlook on meals, Ram straightened her light crimson eyes. And, whilst caressing her own slim chest. Ram, kindly exert yourself as much as you can, Barusu. Calling out to the young boy not present here, extraordinary determination levitated across her cold expression. Ram, though something like collective destiny, makes one shiver. He took a deep inhale, with a cloth covering his mouth protecting him from swallowing the sand. If he were to be honest, then he would have preferred to have goggles as well, but that would be a hope too high. Prepared to have grains of sand fly into his eyeballs, he had no choice but simply be careful about his eyes within the vortex of the sandy whirlwind. Subaru, Bako. Meili. We've gotta pull through. Beatrice, Betty knows, in fact. Meili, geez, you really don't know how to treat people. The one traversing through his field of vision blurred by the sand, was a fiendish existence clad in a jet black shell. Approaching closer, and taking a single attack by its great pincers meant forfeiting life. Taking distance, and should it succeed in its efforts to fire its tail stinger meant forfeiting life. There were multiple other conditions of forfeiting life as well. In terms of simply conditions of defeat, there existed more than plenty. That is what their situation was presently. Subaru, with that being said, that's what always happens. Natsuki Subaru's battles were a series of continued tightrope walks. The reason why he suffocated despite knowing the future through return by death was because of the abilities he could possess, and the sheer magnitude of the enemies he confronted never allowed him to counterbalance. Lacking cards to play was his omnipresent scenario. Whilst trusting everyone's strength, expecting that they'd adapt to the situation's requirements and fight, Subaru himself struggled hard, a befitting answer to everyone's expectations of him. Subaru, rather than a fight of my own, this is a fight of my wonderful comrades. Meili, is this really the situation to say that? Geez. Do your best, Hungry Horse King-chan? Receiving Subaru's belonious yell, Meili, who was racing right next to him, issued orders to the witch beasts' Hungry Horse Kings. The witch beasts akin to centaurs screeched like the cry of a child, and two of them carrying Subaru and Beatrice, and Meili respectively rushed through the sea of sand. And, the one in pursuit of their backs as they fiercely kicked the sand, was the titanic scorpion as it scratched the sand with its several legs and gave a rise to a cloud of dust, resuming its hounding. Bishayan. Just as his instinct had told him earlier, should they distance themselves, then the tail stinger, should they approach closer, then the enormous pincers, shall come for their lives. Whilst keeping a distance, neither too close nor too far, they coped with the enemy's attacks. Compared to the conditions of defeat he had listed, the sole condition for victory permitted to them was a change at the extremity of stalemate. It referred to Amelia capturing the first layer of the tower, and the rewriting of the cited rules. As a matter of fact, he hadn't even confirmed whether that was an actual possibility. Beatrice, if that's not possible, then it'll be strange to have that included in the tower's rules in the first place, I suppose. Subaru, exactly, Biko. Going out of their way and having you can also destroy the rules included in the rules means that the rules are premised on the fact that they'll be destroyed. And if that was a possibility, then it was perhaps a reward given to the one who captured the tower. Should that be considered, then it was a right given only to the one who had cleared everything with proper means. It was an immense relief that Emilia had entirely broken through Reed. Had she not been victorious, then the means to save Shala perhaps wouldn't have even grazed past his hands. Subaru, though I'll never forgive him for sexually harassing Emilia-tan. Though it was a happening infuriating to even look back on, Julius had been charged with retribution when it came to Reed. Expecting that he shall fully overwhelm that violent man, Subaru caught the enormous sand tower within his field of vision and entrusted himself to the fierce struggle Beatrice and Meili were putting up. Meili, Oni-san. It isn't easy to move around in this spot. I think it'll be easier for the witch beastjons to rampage about in a place further away from the tower. Subaru, Guh. I get what you're saying. I get it, but, no. I won't get away from the tower. If I get any further away, then I'll lose grasp. Rejecting Meili's appeal, Subaru gnashed his molars whilst grabbing his chest. Cor Leonis efficacy resumed, and the locations of his comrades within the tower were still within his sphere of grasp, in the form of fleeting lights. However, he did not know for what possible cause this authority, with yet far too many uncertain facets, may come undone. In terms of the authority's efficiency, what was the easiest to perceive was indeed distance. In reality, Subaru did not know the locations of his comrades outside of the Agria sand dunes. If that was due to distance, then it was unknown how far he could get away from the tower. He was afraid of losing the ability to confirm the locations as well as the well-being of his comrades. However, the greatest issue was not their well-being but losing the ability to shoulder their burden. It was a matter of course that Emilia or Julius had exposed their bodies to grave battles, but what further had an eagle grip on Subaru's heart was Ram, who was out for vengeance. Though he was confident that he had deployed his comrades to their respective utmost suitable positions, he had anticipated from the very beginning that even amongst them all, Ram's fight would become particularly dire. That's because her opponent was Lei Batten Katos, the originator of turning Rem into a sleeping beauty, and Ram's own condition. Ram must be in perfect shape and form, otherwise she shan't be able to oppose Lei Batten Katos. On top of that, he wished for Ram to beat Batten Katos down to her heart's content. For that purpose, Subaru was required to shoulder the burden she consistently suffered. That is precisely why. Subaru, I can't just thoughtlessly get away from the tower. Sorry for being a handicap, but please compromise. Meili, hook. This is, absolutely definitely going to come back to bite you later. Rounding her lips upon Subaru's call, Meili shouted with a red face atop of the hungry Horse King's back. At the same pace, the young girl glared towards the sky and clapped her hands towards the existences circling around in the blue, cloudless sky. Meili, winged molchons. It's show time. Receiving the shrill command, the tiny shadows soaring in the sky swooped down towards the sand sea. Seeing they were aiming for the titanic scorpion atop the sand, Subaru instantly shouted Biko. Subaru, match in with them. Beatrice, Betty knows, in fact. Vita. Presuming Subaru's aim, Beatrice put up her tiny palm towards the sky. The chance effect was invoked, however, the aim wasn't towards the titanic scorpion, but towards the winged moles which had their eyes set on the titanic scorpion. In the course of the descending winged moles, there was a loop of pale light produced the moment the winged moles passed through that loop, the small-sized witch beasts accelerated, clad in light. The piercing strike drilled into the outer shell of the titanic scorpion, giving rise to a violent note. The titanic scorpion, which had been accepting the battle cries of the winged moles like gentle breeze until now, stopped its multiple legs upon the direct hit, possessing unignorable might. Meili, what was that, just now? Beatrice John, what did you do? Beatrice, made your witch beasts heavy right before they collided, I suppose. Their speed or solidity won't change, but the result changes with a simple increase in weight, in fact. Beatrice responded to Meili's astonishment. That was the answer to the reason behind the sudden enhancement of the winged moles. Strength was a mix of weight and velocity. Winged moles navigated underground using their potent horns, the risky assault of the witch beasts which flew about in the sky and the underground it will decisively halted the steps of the titanic scorpion with unbelievable destructiveness. The titanic scorpion's defensive capability was quite impressive, but it wasn't able to completely defend an attack it was witnessing for the first time. And, in order to surpass that reflective defense capability, Subaru fully rotated his head. Subaru, I feel bad for the witch beasts, but it's a trade-off between life and time. There's plenty of quantity and varieties of witch beasts that can be used, with Biko's assistance the possibilities are infinite. This way. They can succeed. That definite response made Subaru clench his fist and Beatrice's hair. Beatrice raised her voice in protest, saying it hurts, I suppose. That was the instant. Subaru, ah. With the plan to buy as much time as possible, Subaru spilled out a voice whilst looking up towards the watchtower. Hearing his vacant voice, Beatrice turned around saying Subaru, but he remained unable to respond. What was brought to Subaru's consciousness was not the visible exterior of the watchtower, but its interior, the interior of the tower whereby he could sense fleeting lights at various locations. The reason was the responses of his comrades. Likely, it appeared each one of them must be engaged in vehement battles, amongst them a single one's response vanished. The response of Amelia, who was heading to the top. That moment, Subaru's heart throbbed so intensely as if it had come detached. The reality that Amelia's response had vanished threw Subaru into a state of chaos. What if, within the couple of moments just now, Amelia had been lost? Subaru, Huck, calm down, bloody bastard. He halted his vision from blackening through a reprimand of his own. This was far too early to despair about the reality. He needed to trust Sor Leona's ability more. Though its origin was from the worst kind of a man, but now that it had blossomed, this authority was an ally. Based on the responses of Sor Leonis until now, it could be assumed that the intensity of the fleeting light's warmth and movement conveyed the status of his allies. When they became violently worked up, the colors or intensity of the lights changed. Then, did the disappearance of Amelia's response refer to her death? Subaru, if that's the case, then the rate at which the response disappeared happened way too instantly. If it were to be assumed that Amelia encountered an enemy so fearsome it was able to extinguish her existence in a single instant, even if she had fallen into its hands, he couldn't imagine her being taken out without resistance. He couldn't imagine, neither did he want to. He had belief. That's why, the problem perhaps lied somewhere else. Rushing up the watchtower, Amelia had headed for the first layer, and something had happened which made her body go out of the range of Sor Leona's influence. Thus, in but a single instant, Amelia's response disappeared from Subaru's perception. He must believe so, otherwise. Beatrice, Subaru. Meili, Oni-san. This is no time to space out. Gnashing his molars and gums, Subaru kept himself in check through pain as the two young ladies called out to him. Hearing them, Subaru responded with I know such that both himself and they could hear it. Subaru, I have no idea whom she may have to confront and where. But I believe that she will make her way back. At the same time as when Subaru had pronounced words of prayer, far below on the sand. Though Subaru said that he did not know whom she may have to confront, there was no way that even Subaru's imagination could have predicted the situation Amelia had been placed in. Abiding by Subaru's command, Amelia had headed to the first layer in order to rewrite the rules of Pleiades' watchtower. What she encountered was a blue, shimmering, gargantuan existence clad in scales. An existence whose name nobody was unaware of in this kingdom of Lugnica, no, in the entire world. If the Witch of Envy was regarded as the symbol of fear, then it was the befitting symbol of hope and faith. For this existence had continued to accumulate meritorious deeds of such scale for the world. The name of that gargantuan and great existence. Amelia, Divine Dragon Volcanica. Ruminating the name it had given for itself, Amelia felt her entire body colden. Though a strange thing to say, Amelia's predisposition was entirely detached from nervousness. Though of course she felt her body be heavier when she had to stand in front of people or when she had to talk about something crucial, but upon undertaking practical action she immediately forgot about their effects. On multiple occasions she had been praised by Subaru or Ram for having that impressive quality. However, despite possessing that impressive quality, Amelia's physical movement ceased completely before the Divine Dragon. Such that she felt she couldn't take even a single breath without the opponent's permission. To such an extent, the presence of the true dragon was projected, and had its grasp on the world. Whilst inhaling, Amelia once again glanced at Volcanica's frame. Scales with a deep tinge of blue were shimmering like jewels, and every single one of them appeared to have been tempered thoroughly, as if sharper than any treasured sword. Its forelimbs and hindlimbs were endowed with black claws akin to stone. Its face, similar to that of a ground dragon, gave the impression of having lived for long, and a pair of golden eyes that had witnessed an unfathomable amount of time. On its head were two enormous horns, white like a noble's milk. The divine dragon's stature was likely about 15 or 16 meters in height. Since it wasn't standing, had its wings and tail folded, its exact enormity couldn't be determined. But despite that it was this gargantuan, a matter of course that it couldn't be fit inside the tower. It was unquestionable that the first layer had been constructed in an open location because of Volcanica. Amelia, the third layer was the Sage, the second layer was Reed, and the first layer is Volcanica. Volcanica. Amelia, could it be that all three heroes of the great antiquity are involved in the tower's trials? Looking back onto the trials until how, Amelia discovered a similitude between them. The three heroes they had formerly made efforts in the sealing of the Witch of Envy, and were three heroic figures engraved into the history of the Kingdom of Lugnica. those being Shala, Reed, and Volcanica. Furthermore, Shala had stated that it was actually an achievement of Flugel's, Reed was incredibly violent and talked crudely, and Volcanica was not a person but a dragon. But if they were yet connected in this place, then Emilia, to still be friends after so many centuries, that's really wonderful. Emilia thought it was a very wonderful thing if something like commitment or unity had tied the three heroic figures together. On top of that, Volcanica was the existence who had pledged a covenant with the kingdom of Lugnica, and as a matter of fact, when a black dragon had been rampaging within the kingdom of Lugnica multiple decades ago, it had been recorded that it possessed extraordinary power. Emilia loved those who viewed promises as important. She believed that upholding promises was a very nice thing. She cherished Subaru and trusted him, but she believed his characteristic of not upholding promises was no good. What if Beatrice started imitating him? Neither did Emilia wish to scold Subaru and Beatrice for breaking promises. Emilia, whoops. This is no time to be thinking all that. Volcanica. I came here to take the trial. The trial of the first layer. I'll tackle it. Volcanica. Emilia, I don't know how tough a trial it will be. But, I ask of you to hurry. I must hurry or Subaru and the others will be in trouble. Whatever it may be, bring it on. Striking her cheeks with her hands, Emilia reorganized her cowering emotions. Without even planning so, thinking about Subaru and Beatrice made the route for that. Even if they were to be scolded by Emilia for breaking promises, that was speaking of a distant tomorrow, a distant future. In order to come face to face with that future, Emilia needed to stand firm here. Volcanica. The silent divine dragon was intently watching Emilia with its golden-hued eyes. Speaking without exaggeration, those eyes felt deep enough to absorb her entirely. It had fought the Witch of Envy and forged the covenant with the kingdom of Lugnica 400 years ago, but the time this great dragon had lived through appeared to be far greater than those 400 years. Those eyes, perhaps close to reaching 1,000 years of age, were intently gazing upon the world. It was unknown in what way would Emilia's existence be projected to this divine dragon. Emilia, I am used to being judged. There are people who hate me because I'm a half-elf, or meanies like Echidna. But, like Subaru, Ram or Beatrice and everyone else, there are also people who have laid their expectations on me. Whilst addressing, Emilia touched the crystal on her chest with her fingers. Her family, who was yet asleep, was the first one to affirm Emilia, who largely looked through rose-colored glasses like this. With that family of hers as the beginning, in this tower were her comrades who had accepted Emilia. Emilia, that's why, I don't care no matter how you look at me. Before the divine dragon she had been overawed by once, Emilia declared sharply. Even the existence known as Emilia, who had been crushed by the contrast in presence, whose limbs had been quivering and cowering, who had been overwhelmed by the existence acquainted to eternity, shall no longer lose. No matter what, she shan't lose. Volcanica. Emilia strengthened her fist and made her amethyst eyes glitter with might. Whilst being showered with Emilia's gaze throughout its entire body, Volcanica slowly blinked. Afterwards, Volcanica moved its dragon jaws with grandeur. Volcanica, thou, who hath reached the top of the tower. Step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Emilia, huh? Emilia, who had packed her breath and put herself on guard for the challenge Volcanica may ask her of, heard the cumbrous words accompanying the dragon breath and tilted her head. For she had remembrance of these words. Emilia, hadn't you told me about that earlier? That I am the one who arrived at the first layer, and that you are Volcanica. Is that right? Volcanica. Emilia, Did I not introduce myself, by chance? I apologize. I am Emilia, just Emilia. Well, there's many people right now who don't remember me, so it'll be a problem if you ask me to prove it, but I'm Emilia. Volcanica. Emilia, still, no good? Thinking whether her omitting her introduction had brought its displeasure, she reintroduced herself, yet no positive change was born in Volcanica's response. Had Subaru been here, he would have gone so far and thought that skipping introduction led to the revocation of the right to take the trial of the first layer, but Emilia did not think that way. Emilia believed that even if a mistake was made, upon apologizing the opponent couldn't continue being so heartless. Thus, even at this instant she did not believe her impoliteness had bought Volcanica's silence. What Emilia had thought of was the possibility that Volcanica was not angry. But even if that were to be the case, it might have been much worse than simply being angered. After all, Emilia, could it be? Gazing back into its golden eyes, Emilia timidly moved forward. 1 step, 2 steps, resuming her walk in a place close to the sky, she shortened the distance between herself and the divine dragon Volcanica. Amelia inched closer, as it breathed, that too with magnificence. And, gently stretching her hand forward, she touched the scales of the opponent's front leg. Amelia, cold. The scales she touched were cold like ice, or like steel which had cooled down. Just how long a duration would one need to remain stagnated, to lose this much heat? It did not mean biological death. Those who remained stagnated for a long duration, simply lost bodily energy. Volcanica, thou, who hath reached the top of the tower. Step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Whilst gazing down upon Amelia who was touching its foreleg, Volcanica repeated once again. Words of reception that had been repeated and stockpiled exactly thrice. They were not with the purpose of condemning the mistake Amelia made with her greeting. Volcanica's eyes, which were profoundly staring at Amelia, were reflecting her as if not reflecting her. Its reason was apparent. Amelia, could it be, you became such an old uncle that you forgot about the trial? Not the death of the body, but the death of the mind had hunted the long-lived dragon. And for Amelia, who must clear the trial of the first layer, it befell as a challenge beyond the trial of the first layer. The great library of Pleiades, the trial of the first layer of Maya. The time limit, the time for the survival of her comrades. Number of challenges, unknown. Number of challengers, 1. Content of the trial, unknown. Trial, begin. End of chapters 79 and 80, ready steady go.